Picture this. The year is 2007, and you and your friends are playing World of Warcraft. It's been a few months since the Burning Crusade dramatically expanded upon World of Warcraft's offerings, and now that you're approaching level 70, it's time to begin exploring WoW's endgame. And all roads to that endgame lead to one place. Nestled in a dark valley in between Duskwood and the Swamps of Sorrows, there is a tower. Unfortunately, you can't just walk in the door, you're going to need a key, and getting a key is going to take a lot of time. Learning about what this tower is and what exactly it's doing here. You learn that there is some old guardian mage named Medivh who went crazy and opened the dark portal to the Orcish Horde, creating an eternal link between Azeroth and what is now Outland. To the lore nerdiest among us, this stuff is fascinating, but you may just be interested in getting your foot in the door. Years and years of World of Warcraft have conditioned us to keep seeking out more and more powerful gear, and Karazhan is the first plentiful source of epic quality equipment. Therefore, at the moment, for you, Karazhan is not necessarily an ends, but a means of acquiring more and more powerful loot. And so, after spending hours and hours in the Black Morass earning your key, it's time to begin climbing the tower. Karazhan is home to 12 boss encounters, each more devious and deadly than the last, and if you want to fight to the tower's apex, you'll need to dispatch at least 5 of them. This sort of non-linear design philosophy was only really present in World of Warcraft during its earliest iterations, and ultimately went on to serve 2 purposes. First, it allowed dungeons to be streamlined. A group could enter a dungeon, take down the enemies it needed to take down, and then leave without having to clear every single one of its encounters. Alternatively, it also added flavor to these dungeons, giving them a sense of place within the world. A good example of this is the Blackrock Depths. Designed to be a dark simulacrum of Ironforge, this dungeon feels like a lived-in city, with many different districts and areas to explore. For a large number of reasons I will touch on as we progress through this video, Karazhan is something of the apex of this design philosophy, managing to merge both flavorful delivery with functional design. Speaking of design, Karazhan as a raid can really be broken up into 2 chunks, the lower floors and the upper floors, separated by a side entrance which allows quick access to the latter. Though these 2 halves are quite different in terms of tone and difficulty, they actually share a remarkably similar structure, something that will become more apparent the more time you invest in climbing the tower. If you wish to progress up the tower, then your first target will need to be Morose, as he blocks progression to the Opera House event. But he himself is no simple pushover. You see, Morose is Karazhan's first major gear check, a boss fight specifically designed to test if your party can output enough damage, healing, and take enough punishment to survive subsequent boss battles. Morose manages to accomplish this duty in a rather simple manner. Every 30 seconds he will vanish from view and apply a debuff to a random raid member. This debuff, called Garrote, deals damage every second and effectively doesn't expire. Therefore, these debuffs will begin to pile up on your raid, and so will the damage they deal. Ultimately, this fight becomes a race between Morose's health bar and your healer's mana bar. Eventually, that damage will become overwhelming and your party will simply wither away. This would be a fairly simple formula if not for one additional caveat. Morose does not fight alone. He's joined in battle by 4 dinner guests, randomly selected from a pool of 6. Each of these dinner guests brings a new devastating ability to the fight, healing Morose, stunning raid members, even burning healer mana. If left uncontrolled, these dinner guests can spell a quick end to your group. Killing all 4 of these dinner guests before focusing on Morose spends valuable damage on enemies that ultimately don't matter. Instead, the optimal strategy is to simply control them. Hunter traps, priest shackles, and even a paladin's turn undead are extremely valuable tools here, as they allow you to deal with these threats without spending much damage on them. Even knowing all of that, Morose is something of an insurmountable wall to newer groups. The odds of victory were already tight, and the lower the group's quality of gear, the tighter they become. Fortunately though, Karazhan's lower floors are home to 5 boss encounters, 4 of which are open to the party the moment they walk in the door. Making a right upon entering the tower will lead you to the dilapidated servants' quarters, and the beast boss. A simple encounter chosen from a pool of 3 variants, a bat, a hound, or a spider. This encounter serves as an easy source of early gear. Turn left at the entrance and you'll enter the stables where Attribution the huntsman resides. A fairly simple battle with him and his horse Midnight rewards equipment, a chance at a sought-after mount, and, if you have the right connections, an invaluable place to repair your equipment. Finally, making your way through a secret corridor in the servants' quarters or traveling through the ballroom and slipping into a side passage reveals the guest quarters, and the paradoxically placed Maiden of Virtue, stoically overseeing the tower's harem. These 3 encounters form an arc of difficulty, starting with the beast boss, then moving on to Attribution, and finally ending with the Maiden. They can be engaged in any order you choose and provide invaluable equipment and tactical lessons to new groups struggling with Morose. Their optionality performs double duty as well. For raid groups simply looking to progress to the upper floors, most can be skipped entirely, saving valuable time traversing the monolithic tower. And for those groups who are just starting out, they form an excellent foundation of equipment. And with this loot in hand, Morose, the Chamberlain of Karazhan, won't stand a chance.
How terribly clumsy of me.
I find this dynamic really interesting and valuable, especially for building up your team dynamic. It means that your raid group always has a reason to come to Karazhan. There are always going to be a few bosses you can take down, even if you're stuck on the stumbling block that is Morose. And I think the designers saw that as well, as it is a dynamic that will repeat later in the raid. But first, there is still one encounter left to complete before we can begin ascending Medivh's mysterious tower in earnest. And this is an encounter that many people may have heard of long before they stepped into the halls of Karazhan. The Opera House is emblematic of Karazhan's dedication to flavor, and though it's not much more difficult than the fight that precedes it, it does act as an extremely strong poster child for the tower. I'm sure it's no stretch to assume that many people took up the ascent of Karazhan after hearing about such a strange and wonderful encounter, wanting to experience it for themselves. The Opera House is not one encounter, but one of 3, randomly selected at the beginning of each week. The party must undertake in the performance of either Romulo and Julian, a play on the Shakespearean tragedy, The Wizard of Oz, or The Little Red Riding Hood. And although none of these encounters are particularly challenging, each playing on a single mechanic, they do go a long way to cementing Karazhan as a raid laden with memorable and interesting experiences. All of these years later, I have a hard time remembering the names of the Ogre Council and Gruul's Lair, or even what they do. Yet I can remember each of the performances of the Opera House with crystal clarity, something that goes to show just how powerful a dash of flair can be. But eventually the curtain must fall on the Opera House, and thus on the lower floors of Karazhan, and it is time for a shift in tone as we begin our ascent of the tower in earnest. This shift will begin in the Broken Stair, a place that acts as a firebreak between the haunted house below and the utter strangeness above. This area is also the location of a side entrance to Karazhan, acting as a shortcut, marking the official halfway point of the raid. Even the music decides to mark this change, with the almost comical harpsichord making a swift exit for something far more ominous. Atop these stairs is the Menagerie, Medivh's personal quarters, and a place of incredible arcane knowledge. But guarding this place is the Curator. As Karazhan's second major gear check, the Curator is another brick wall for many groups, so much so that his battle cry is utterly etched in my memory.
The Menagerie is for guests only.
To test the party's damage output, the Curator releases wave after wave of arcane flares, which dart towards the party and deal incredible damage. These flares must be destroyed quickly, lest they overwhelm the party and cause a wipe. But with their hands so full with these flares, the party will find they have rarely a chance to damage the Curator himself, and when they do, his considerable resistances make such damage negligible. But even the considerable Curator has its limits. Summoning so many flares will drain its mana, and eventually it must recharge. This presents a moment of vulnerability in which the Curator's defenses are lowered. The party then must take advantage of this short window to deal as much damage as possible. With this, the balance becomes clear. The party must maintain as much damage as possible against the flares while still saving their highest damage abilities and cooldowns for the Curator's vulnerability phases. And even with this in mind, the Curator is still a considerable damage test, often requiring many weeks worth of gear farming to finally topple. Though when he does go down, he rewards the party with a coveted piece of the Tier 4 armor set. This gives way to the menagerie itself, a massive library and reliquary filled with all manner of arcane secret. And though the path through Upper Karazhan may be considerably more linear than the open concept of the lower levels, there is still a lot to explore here. Hidden bookcases hide boss battles. Mysterious tomes on the floor can confer buffs or curses. And of course, the nooks and crannies like Medivh's bedchambers and the mysterious Griffin Roost, often rumored to be the source of a skeletal griffin mount that simply never materialized. But Upper Karazhan is also home to the dungeon's remaining 5 boss encounters, 3 of which are optional and hidden just off the beaten path. Terrestrian Illhoof is the first of this trio, a satyr hidden behind an inconspicuous bookcase. This demon worshipper summons armies of imps to overwhelm the party, and randomly chooses members to sacrifice in order to rejuvenate his own health bar. Therefore, this battle emphasizes area of effect damage, with the ability to quickly switch to single target to deal with sacrificial bindings. Notable not only was Illhoof's interesting mechanics, but also his loot. Many sought after the Terrestrian's Strangle Staff, not only for its considerable physical DPS statistics, but also its rather unique animated appearance. Hidden further up along the menagerie pathway is a private library concealing the Shade of Iran, Medivh's late father, and one of the more experimental battles within Karazhan. Foregoing one of the 3 pillars of World of Warcraft's PvE trinity, Iran does not require a tank, instead attacking largely at random. Instead, this battle comes down to the party's ability to avoid Iran's devastating spells, a deadly creeping blizzard which slowly makes its way around the outer edges of the room, an incredible powerful arcane explosion that will simply annihilate the unprepared and flat-footed, and a raid-wiping spell so legendary it earned itself a chant. And of course, the final member of this trio, the dragon Netherspite. A drake kept in the Celestial Observatory, this dragon empowers himself with arcane conduits. While benefiting from these conduits, Netherspite is utterly insurmountable, but these buffs can be stolen. By intercepting these conduits, players gain their power, but also a slowly increasing drawback. As leaving these conduits imparts a cooldown before they can be accepted again, the party must carefully choose who receives these buffs, and when, in order to maximize their effectiveness. These 3 encounters once again form an arc of difficulty, one that can be completely foregone should the party not require their rewards. This arc exists to prepare players for the final battle at Karazhan's ultimate apex, furnishing the players with equipment and skills necessary to defeat the tower's new owner. But even now, as we stand atop the menagerie in a place where the real seems to bleed slowly into the strange, we have 1 encounter remaining before we may confront Karazhan's master. As we make our way into the final echelons of Karazhan, we enter the Gamesmen's Hall and encounter an echo of Medivh, the tower's former master. And ever the gracious host, he invites us to play a game. The way this game works is that players are tasked with taking control of individual chess pieces, and then using these pieces to defeat Medivh's king. This occurs in a manner very reminiscent of the vehicle system that will be introduced in Wrath of the Lich King, just 1 expansion after Burning Crusade. Unfortunately, Medivh's artificial intelligence does not exactly present an incredibly skilled foe, and therefore he must compensate by cheating. But even the underhanded ploys of this ghost can't make this battle challenging, as Chess Event was well known as being an almost soloable affair. This would eventually lead to it having a reputation as almost free loot. That said, it made for an incredibly interesting and memorable encounter, yet another poster child for Karazhan's flavorful delivery and design. But upon Medivh's defeat, the final door to Karazhan's apex will open, allowing the party to finally reach the peak of the tower. From here, there's nothing more to explore, nothing more to find. The final steps of Karazhan are before you, and as you reach the tower's apex, you see it for what it truly is. Mysterious shapes in the distance, a strange realm not visible from the outside. The peak of Karazhan is something beyond comprehension, beyond understanding. Karazhan's apex is a place removed from reality. And inhabiting this apex is its final and greatest challenge. The demonic prince Malchezaar. Infernals pierce through the alien sky and slam into the top of the tower, slowly filling it with an aura of hellfire, coming faster and faster the longer the battle lingers. Malchezaar pummels your tanks with incredible damage, both from his fists and his weapons. And he keeps the raid members on their toes, pummeling them with painful spells that must be quickly healed, and cursing them with enfeeblement, which reduces their maximum hit points to 1, shortly before following out with a universally fatal Shadow Nova. As the fight wears on, it becomes less and less stable. More Infernals fall, more Shadow Novas, more enfeeblements, and more punishing blows to the tank. Any mistake can quickly cause a wipe, and thus the party must be near perfect to overcome the Eridar Prince. But Malchezaar does little to respect this perfection. His fight is especially susceptible to RNG and therefore can be incredibly frustrating. Bad infernal placement can, at the best of times, take DPS off the boss, and at the worst of times, create unwinnable scenarios and inevitable damage. It may take many weeks for a group to gear up and practice enough to bring down the prince, but eventually he too will go down. The infernals will be on your side, and your skill will prove fatal. But after the fight with the prince, something lingers. How could a dungeon so flavorful, so dedicated to its own history, wind up with a final battle with a character just introduced now and given no real explanation for being there beyond the tower is corrupt? Malchezaar is an unknown before we walk in the door, and he is ultimately an unknown up until his death. Why is he the final boss? Those of you who are more experienced, or those of you who are simply clever, may already point out that I've omitted something from the raid. There is one more secret for Karazhan to possess. I mentioned that this dungeon is home to 12 bosses, but I've only touched on 11. As you've been adventuring through Karazhan, you've been building up something of a reputation with a group of wizards known as the Violet Eye. These Dalarani mages have been investigating the tower to find some of Medivh's lost secrets, and upon building up a strong enough reputation, they will invite you to find Medivh's lost journal. This will lead you upon a breadcrumb chain of stories, which will explain the fall of the tower and its eventual corruption, and the destruction of the one who was sent to mitigate it. Arcanagos was a dragon of the blue flight, concerned with all things magical. He detected the corruption of Karazhan and came to urge Medivh and the townspeople below to leave, lest they fall to darker forces. Little did they know that Medivh was in fact the source of this corruption, and ultimately, that would spell the dragon's end, burned inside out by the Guardian's foul magic. Though Medivh has long since left this place, the remains of the dragon Arcanagos can still be found. By utilizing a blackened urn acquired through the quest chain, you can summon these remains for the final battle in Karazhan's canon. The dark and horrifying monstrosity, Nightbane. Nightbane is the culmination of everything that Karazhan has sought to teach you. A monster that requires precision from every member of your raid. Found not at the top of the tower, but deep in the Broken Stair among ruin and rot, Nightbane is the antithesis of Prince Malchezaar. Where Malchezaar is deeply susceptible to randomness, Nightbane only praises skill. His attacks reward precision, skill, and awareness. While on the ground, he must be tanked in a very specific way so that the raid is not made vulnerable to his frontal cleave, rear tail sweep, and devastating breath weapon. Nightbane's terrifying roar requires quick and careful use of fear wards and tremor totems to prevent the dragon from rampaging through your group as the tank recoils in horror. When Nightbane takes to the air, the onus switches to the damage dealers, who must defeat wave after wave of skeletons summoned by raining bone, lest they overwhelm the party. And this high level of skill from all members of the party must be sustained through the dragon's considerably large pool of hit points. It's no wonder that Nightbane is often regarded as the true final boss of Karazhan, as he is the most difficult, but also the most satisfying kill in the dungeon. It may take weeks of practice and gearing, but eventually a dedicated group should have no problem defeating this skeletal horror and putting Arcanagos to rest. And as Nightbane falls, no matter for what reason you came here, to purge the corruption, to collect loot, or simply out of sheer curiosity, your task is finally at an end. Until next raid reset. Karazhan is an interesting place. The first stop on Burning Crusade's raid progression arc provides possibly its most enduring and powerful member. For me at least, Karazhan was something of a transformative experience. The unique and interesting encounters that have stuck with me through all these years changed the way I view raiding. When I walked into Karazhan, the tower was but a means, a way to acquire loot for myself, to grow my character and to advance through World of Warcraft's story. When I left Karazhan, I left it as a raider. Someone who delved into these dungeons for the pure fun of doing so. Karazhan became and ends. I wanted to be there for the camaraderie, for the fun, for the boss fights. And loot, well, loot, oddly enough, became the means to raid. It was for a mix of reasons that this happened. Memorable experiences and encounters in a truly strange place that drew me in when I didn't even realize I had to be drawn in. And ultimately, it taught me everything I needed to know to raid. If it weren't for the tower, well, then this video obviously wouldn't exist. But neither would this channel, nor would my dogged dedication to the genre of video games from which it sprang. The design lessons imparted, the friendships made, the bosses defeated. I think we should always remember that nestled in a dark valley between Duskwood and the Swamps of Sorrows, there will always exist a lonely tower.